All right, our next lecture will be on Augustinian Christianity. In the first couple hundred years of the advent of Christianity, there were a couple of major turning points. Obviously, when Christ came and inaugurated a Christian religion separate from Judaism, obviously that was a huge turning point. Secondly, when Christianity became an imperial religion, not only an accepted religion, but eventually the state religion, that changed fundamentally how Christianity operated in the early church. The third major turning point was Augustine, the thought and life of Augustine. His contributions are so significant, there is no way we can cover everything that Augustine has passed down to us as Christians. Augustine wrote well over 1 million words in his lifetime, and we have most of them preserved. That's highly unusual. That speaks to how important Augustine was in his own day and how he continues to be relevant in our own expression of Christianity. We are going to look at Augustine mainly through his Confessions. There's lots of other great texts, his Teaching Christianity, the City of God, and so on and so forth, that we won't have time to get to. But I do want to spend some sustained time looking at his Confessions and how that illustrates the difference in approach that Augustine had to his predecessors and how Augustine's thought continues to be relevant to our own faith and our own age. Norman Cantor had a great quote about the importance of Augustine. Of all the fathers of the church, St. Augustine was the most admired and the most influential during the Middle Ages. Augustine was an outsider, a native North African whose family was not Roman but Berber. He was a genius, an intellectual giant. This kind of sums up who Augustine was. He was not of the establishment. Ethnically speaking, he was not Roman. He was a Roman citizen, but not Roman ethnically. That he could attain a privilege, a position through his learning. And his learning has kind of changed how we all understand our own faith. Before we get into the Confessions, though, I do want to talk a little bit more abstractly, zoom out a little bit, and talk about story theory. And this can be our introduction to talking about what drove Augustine's Confessions, what drove the narrative of the Confessions. I learned this from my medieval church history professor, and it's just captivated me ever since. That every great story out there follows the same template, follows the same mold. That at the beginning of the story, there is a homeostasis, there's a balance. All is well, life is beautiful. And then there's this cataclysmic event that throws everything out of balance, throws everything out of whack. The rising action is defined by the protagonist taking larger and larger and larger steps to return the situation back to balance, back to homeostasis. The climax comes when the protagonist takes a step larger than any could be imagined, this grand gesture to reclaim homeostasis. And then the falling action is the process by which the situation actually does return back into balance. Okay, we can see this in The Lord of the Rings, right? Life in the Shire is pretty good. People are partying and they're drinking, they don't have a care in the world. But then they discover that not only does Bilbo have this ring of power, but there are bad people coming to get it. This is not good. We must take the ring out of the Shire and move into the dark, dangerous world out there. So Frodo, Frodo is our protagonist and takes it out of the Shire and takes it to Rivendell, and then has to take it to Mordor. There comes a point in time where he has to take the biggest step possible. He has to physically himself go into Mordor to get rid of this ring. and he's halfway up the mountain and his strength fails him, and his friend Samwise has to carry him up there. And when he's about ready to destroy it, he has a change of heart and he doesn't want to. And then Gollum, who we all thought would be the undoing of this whole thing, actually is the vehicle by which the ring is destroyed. His grand gesture, and they return to the Shire, and a lot of the Shire acts as if nothing had happened. And in Frodo's case, the Shire is not the end of it. He still cannot find balance at the Shire. He has to go with the elves to the Western Lands, and then all is good again. You can see this in The Lion King. Life is good. Simba's dad dies. Everything's thrown out of whack. It is a template by which every story follows to one extent or another. Believe it or not, this is the template by which God's story follows in the Bible. In the Garden of Eden, everything was good. God and man walked together. It was fine. But then the cataclysmic event happened. Man sinned. And this balance was lost. This homeostasis, this paradise was lost. And then the Bible becomes a series of steps taken to return back to balance. But here is one very important thing. If you do not understand this, then you have missed the entire point of the Bible. Man is not the protagonist of the story. The story of the Bible is not man's quest to gain reconciliation with God. It's God's quest to regain man. We can see this in Genesis 3:15. When God promises to send a deliverer. This is not based on anything Adam did. This is in spite of what Adam did. And speaking to the serpent, God said, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. And you will strike his heel and he will crush your head. He, in that context, has no antecedent. It doesn't refer back to anything in that passage. He actually refers to something in the future, which we know as Christ, that Christ, a deliverer, will come and crush the serpent, will make everything right again. This is not because of some foreknowledge of Adam. This is despite Adam's sin. And throughout the Bible, we see the same pattern that, man makes a mistake. There's some consequences, but there's a promise and a blessing after it. We see this in the flood, that man is wicked. Man faces the consequences, but God blesses him anyways. We see this in the fall of the Tower of Babel. There's a sin, there's a consequence, but then there's a blessing afterwards. And in that case, that blessing comes in Genesis chapter 12 when God promises to Abram 5 things. I will make your name great. I will make you a great nation. I will bless those who curse you, or I will bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. This generic blessing of I will bless you, just in general, and this last promise that that Adam will be a blessing to many nations. That is not because of what Abram had done. That is almost in spite of what we as humanity has done. And in order to further bring home this point that God is chasing after man, in Genesis 15, there's a very odd event of God asking Abram to go and fetch a ram and a heifer and some birds, and he asks Abram to cut them in half and lay them on either side of this kind of pathway, walkway. This was an ancient contract ceremony, that when two kings would make a treaty with one another, they would seal it by walking in between these broken animals in front of people as a pledge. If I do not hold up my end of the bargain, this is what I will pledge can happen to me. It was a way of sealing a treaty. In Genesis chapter 15, something very interesting occurs. God causes Abram to fall into a deep sleep, and God, as a smoldering cauldron, walks through on his own. This is a unilateral promise that God gives to us. Okay? God is the one taking larger and larger and larger steps to win us back until he sends his own son. not only sends his own son, but allows his own son to die for us. And through that death and resurrection, we have a version of falling action, this return to homeostasis. We may not be there yet in this phase of eternity. We may not ever get there in this phase of eternity. But God's death and resurrection on the cross makes it possible to regain what was lost in the garden, and actually gain something even better than that. We are going to look at how Augustine's Confessions exemplify this story theory line. Okay, this is an introduction to reading. Once you get started on the Confessions, I'd love to talk more about what specific instances in the Confessions corresponds to the different parts of story theory. Thank you very much.